Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Today's headliner is Vladimir Putin. He held a press conference. It lasted for more than 4 hours. More than 2 million questions were submitted. Of course, he couldn't take all of them. These were questions from the press and the people of Russia. So what did Putin say? We'll tell you. This event also shows that the Russian president has got his swagger back. He has the upper hand in the war. Zelensky is struggling to get more money. Putin is far from isolated and his military is expanding presence in the Indian Ocean. Meanwhile, in the other war, Israel is flooding Hamas tunnels. But what will a post-war Gaza look like? Will Hamas be part of it? In other news, what is the Pakistan Army chief doing in the US? Why the new Maldivian government is off to a shaky start? Why Germany is debating a ban on their far-right party? Why Japan's fundraising scandal is unique? And if you have trouble waking up early, you can now blame your genes for it. We'll bring you all of this and more. The headlines first. Cornered UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says he's open to tweaking the Rwanda bill. It's an attempt to quell dissent among Tory MPs. Sunak's deportation legislation has divided the ruling Conservative Party. On Wednesday, the Prime Minister narrowly won a crucial vote on the bill. Germany will stop accepting imams from Turkey. Berlin says it will instead train the Muslim clerics on home soil. The Turkish Islamic group was managing the foreign imams. The group has been accused of spying for the Erdogan government. Around 5.5 million Muslims live in Germany. In Senegal, big legal win for the opposition. A court clears jail leader Ousmane Sonko to run for president. In June, Sonko was sent to prison for morally corrupting a young person. He was also barred from taking part in the elections due to be held next year. Kenya to be visa-free for all tourists from 2024. Visitors will only need an electronic travel authorization in advance. Tourism is crucial to Kenya's economy. Masai Mara, one of Kenya's main draws, attracts around 300,000 tourists every year. Meta finally rolls out X's rival Threads in the European Union. This comes 5 months after the release of the text-based app in other parts of the world. Threads gained more than 100 million users in its first week, but since July, its numbers have dwindled. And men could soon be able to pop a pill to prevent pregnancy. A group of British men have become the first in the world to trial a male contraceptive pill. The pill YCT529 is hormone-free and prevents sperm production. Vladimir Putin is back. If you ask him, he'll say he never went away. Now, don't get me wrong, the Russian president was not missing, but his usual confidence was. The swagger that you normally associate with him. The snappy comebacks, all of it had faded since the war in Ukraine. It's back though. Today, Putin resumed his annual ritual, that of a year-end press conference. Last year, he decided not to do it. Ukraine's counter-offensive was making gains, the sanctions were biting Russia, and Putin was persona non grata in many countries. So he skipped the press conference last year. But 1 year later, the equation has flipped. Ukraine's second counter-offensive is stalled, Russia's oil revenue is up, and he's just finished a tour of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So Putin is confident. Last week, he launched his re-election campaign. This week, he faced the people, all very elaborate. A shiny television set, a hand-picked audience of 600 people, 2 anchors to ask questions, and seated in the middle, the Russian president. Putin doesn't just take questions from journalists here. He also opens up the phone lines. Ordinary Russians can call and ask questions. At least that's what the Kremlin says. Apparently, they received 2 million call requests. Most of them covered 3 topics: the war in Ukraine, public services, and housing. Of course, all the focus was on Ukraine. And guess how long the whole thing lasted? Over 4 hours and 10 minutes. If you're surprised, don't be, because it was not even his personal best. That would be the 2008 press conference. He spoke for 4 hours and 40 minutes. Putin's answers revealed 4 aspects of the Ukraine invasion. Listen to this.
Let's return to these goals. They have not changed. I'll remind you of what we talked about then. The denazification of Ukraine, its demilitarization, its neutral status. As of yesterday evening, I was informed we now had come up with 486,000. The flow of men ready to defend our homeland with arms in hand is not decreasing. 1,500 men join the ranks daily across the country. There is no need for mobilization as of today. Almost along the entire line of contact, our armed forces, to put it modestly, are improving their position. Almost everyone is in an active stage of actions. Throughout the entire length, there is an improvement in the position of our troops. Under these conditions, when the US planned an organized change of power in Ukraine and Europe is standing silently and watching or even dancing along, how can we build relations with them? We don't mind. It was not us who cut them off, but they're pretending that they don't know or remember anything. What is happening is, of course, a catastrophe. But you and everyone here around the world see it. Look at the special military operation and what is happening in Gaza and feel the difference. There is nothing like this in Ukraine.
One thing is clear, all those illness rumors are fake. Putin seems fit and fine. As for the invasion, the goals have not changed. The Russian president wants to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. And today he came with numbers. He knew exactly how many Russians are deployed in Ukraine. 617,000. He also knew the rate of mobilization, 1,500 soldiers per day. If true, these are very impressive numbers. They tell you why the tide is turning. But let's hit pause on the politics for now, because the press conference also had some lighter moments, one of them involving two Putins. That's right, a deep fake Putin and the real one. You have to see this.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, hello, I am a student at St. Petersburg State University. I want to ask, is it true you have a lot of doubles? And also, how do you view the dangers that artificial intelligence and neural networks bring into our lives? Thank you. Well, I see you may resemble me and speak with my voice, but I have thought about it and decided that only one person must be like me and speak with my voice. And that will be me. One of our famous figures used to make such jokes. But regarding the artificial intelligence, by the way, it's my first double.
How about that? Putin is rattling off at press conferences for 4 hours. He jokes with deep fakes. Now compare this to Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky visited the US this week. He appealed for more military aid from Washington. No luck though. He returned empty-handed. And now, a second setback is brewing. This time in Brussels, the European Union is holding a key summit. They're discussing Kiev's membership to the bloc, but not everyone is keen. Hungary's Viktor Orban says he won't support it.
Enlargement is a merit-based, legally detailed process, which has preconditions. We have set up 7 preconditions, and even by the evaluation of the Commission, 3 out of the 7 is not fulfilled. So there is no reason to negotiate membership of Ukraine now, even not to negotiate.
Orban may not be alone. Another holdout is Slovakia. They elected a new prime minister this year in October. His name is Robert Fico. Now, Fico campaigned on stopping military aid to Ukraine, and in Brussels, he stuck to that.
Yes, it is true that we stopped any military assistance to Ukraine. We will not send anything from state storages from the Slovak army. I openly declared that we do not believe in my government in military solution in Ukraine. The only result will be maybe hundreds and hundreds of thousands victims of this war on both sides of the conflict.
So here's the problem. US military aid could dry up by the end of December, meaning Europe must take the lead now. They will have to cough up money. to plug the gap left by Washington. And Brussels does have a plan. They've added $54 billion to their budget. All of it is for Ukraine. $36 billion as loans and $18 billion as grants. Again, Hungary turned out to be the problem. Viktor Orban wanted $11 billion to strengthen his borders to keep migrants out. If not, he threatened to block the budget. At first, Brussels was defiant. They said they will not be blackmailed. But on the eve of the summit, they relented. So Orban is set to get the $11 billion he wanted. And the assumption is that Ukraine will also get the money. Expect champagne and pats on the back. But let's be clear, this is not a viable strategy. And Vladimir Putin realizes this. He was betting on Western support crumbling, and that's exactly what is happening.
Today, Ukraine produces practically nothing. They are trying to save something, but they produce almost nothing. Everything is brought in from other countries for free. But this freebie may end someday. And apparently it is ending little by little.
It's unfortunate for Kiev. This time last year, they were flying high. Putin was on the defensive. Maybe that was the time to attempt a political settlement, to negotiate from a position of strength. But now it's going to be tough. Russia has increased its attacks on Kiev. Their next plan is to cripple Ukraine's energy infrastructure, and we know the Russian winter. Without energy, it will be unbearable. So Zelensky needs to choose. Does he bet on his flimsy Western allies, or does he try talks? Well, Putin's given his answer. Talks or not, Russia wants the Kiev regime toppled. So Putin sounds confident. He's in control of his game. The West has failed to isolate him. Ukraine has failed to take back territory. And now he is doubling down, exploring new frontiers. Look at the Russian military. They're stepping up presence in India's backyard, the Indian Ocean. More ships have been deployed, more drills are being done. It began in November. The Russian military showed up in the Andaman Sea. They held drills with Myanmar. It was their largest ever military exercise. They called it the first Russian-Myanmar naval exercise in modern history. A few days later, Russian warships anchored in Bangladesh for the first time in 50 years. Again, this was for a military exercise. Russia called it a big milestone. In November, they also held a joint drill with India, a 2-day naval exercise in the Bay of Bengal. And beyond drills, Russia is also pursuing a new military base in Port Sudan. And this is an important gateway to the Indian Ocean. According to one report, this base will host some 300 Russian troops and up to 4 naval ships. So more drills, more partners, and a military base. What does it tell you? Russia wants a foothold in the Indo-Pacific. The question is why? Well, they're chasing 2 goals. The first one is related to the war in Ukraine. By conducting drills in the Indian Ocean, Russia is sending a message to its critics. The war hasn't weakened its forces. It hasn't depleted Russia's war machinery. They can keep fighting in Ukraine while also demonstrating strength in other theaters. That's what Russia is trying to convey. These drills also help their navy to acquire more skills and to remain combat ready. So that's the short-term priority. They also have a long-term goal. You see, this region, the Indian Ocean and the broader Indo-Pacific, holds strategic value. It has key trade routes. It's a battleground for great powers like the United States and China. They're engaged in multiple flashpoints. We keep telling you about them. The South China Sea and Taiwan. In recent months, India too has expanded its drills here. It is working closely with regional players. So why should Russia stay behind? It wants to show the West that it can mount a challenge, that it has friends in this region, that it's far from isolated. Plus, military engagements are vital for Russia's arms industry. For decades, they have been the leading provider of weapons to South Asia. These drills encourage interoperability. They help sustain the market for Russian weapons. And the demand from South Asia is growing, so Russia would not want to lose out. Which brings us to the question, how should India see these moves? Russia is an old partner, a key defense and oil supplier, and an ally, but it's also very close to China. It is expanding military engagements with China. Last year, they held a joint drill in the northern Indian Ocean. 3 countries were involved, Russia, China, and Iran. And this military exercise started in 2019. It has now become a regular feature. So India needs to be cautious. because Russian dependence on China is increasing. So far, they've managed a delicate balancing act, but if push comes to shove, who will Russia choose? India or China? I guess New Delhi should hope for the best and prepare for the worst.
إن أي رهان على ترتيبات في غزة أو في القضية الفلسطينية عامة دون حماس وفصائل المقاومة هي وهم وسراب.
ואני אומר את זה גם נוכח הכאב הגדול, אבל גם מול הלחצים הבינלאומיים. שום דבר לא יעצור אותנו. אנחנו הולכים עד הסוף, עד הניצחון. לא פחות מזה.
That is the next big question. What happens to Gaza after the war? Who will be part of the post-war plan? And most importantly, is there a post-war plan? We've seen many reports and theories, so let's look at the possible scenarios. Could Hamas stick around after the war? Well, their chief says absolutely. That's this man, Ismail Haniyeh. He says any arrangement without Hamas is delusional.
I say that any bet on arrangements in Gaza or in the Palestinian cause in general without Hamas and the resistance factions is an illusion and a mirage.
Easy for him to say, sitting in Doha. All he has to do is record sound bites in front of a fake screen. It's the people of Gaza, in Gaza, who are suffering. More than 18,400 people are dead. Many more will die unless the war ends. And who decides when that happens? Who decides the end? Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu has not revealed his post-war plan. We're assuming that he has one. But Netanyahu has made one thing very clear. Gaza must be free of Hamas.
I want you to pass this along to the last of the soldiers. We are continuing until the end, until victory, until Hamas is annihilated. Let there be no doubt about this. This is important. It is a message I want to convey to every soldier over there.
That's the first contradiction. Hamas says no plan without us. Israel says no plan with Hamas. Which brings us to scenario number 2, a forced eviction of Gaza. It's been discussed before. Many Arab countries have talked about it, that Israel wants to push Gazans into Egypt's Sinai desert. Basically, empty out the strip. No people, no Hamas. Would Cairo agree to such a plan? Their president says no. Reports say his officials have already conveyed the message to Israel. If Gazans are pushed into Egypt, ties will rupture. That's the message from Cairo. Jordan too has said the same. Their foreign minister was speaking in fact in Doha this week. And he said that the IDF will empty Gaza of its people. And what is Israel saying? They say it's all baseless.
What we see in Gaza is not simply the killing of innocent people, the destruction of their livelihoods, but we are seeing a systematic effort, it seems, to empty Gaza from its people.
These are, of course, outrageous and false accusations. Israel is fighting to defend itself from the monsters who perpetrated the October 7th massacre, and the purpose of our campaign is to bring those monsters to justice and ensure that they can never again hurt our people.
But ground accounts differ. Gazan journalists say the IDF is planning to deport Gazans. And it's not a wild theory. Just think about it. First, Israel began attacking northern Gaza, so thousands of people fled to the south. Now they're striking southern Gaza. So where do these people go? Beyond the strip, if they can. Israel can deny all it wants, but an empty Gaza remains a real possibility. And then we have scenario number 3, some sort of peacekeeping arrangement. Again, Israel has hinted at this, creating a buffer zone between Israel and Gaza, a demilitarized safe zone. Reports say they pitched this plan to Egypt, Jordan and the UAE. Just one problem though. Who will control and man this zone? Qatar says no Arab state will do it. Let me quote their Prime Minister. This is what he said. No one from the region will accept to put boots on the ground following an Israeli tank. This is unacceptable. What about an international force? Well, he's rejected that too. He said Palestinians do not need guardians. Well then, what's the answer? The Palestinian Authority has indicated some willingness. Their president says he could administer Gaza on one condition though. It should be a package deal that includes Gaza and the West Bank. So simply put, he wants concessions from Israel, and good luck getting that from Netanyahu. So here's the long story short. No one knows what post-war Gaza will look like. Not Israel, not the United States, and not the Arab countries. They're all going with the flow. Except that flow is leading to the death of innocent civilians. Israel has continued its airstrikes on Gaza. The city of Rafah was hit overnight. At least 20 people were killed. Many more are trapped below the debris. The ground operations also continue. We're talking about intense close-range combat. Both the Hamas and IDF have released footage. Take a look at this now. Israel is also flooding the Hamas tunnels. We're talking about a long network here. Hamas claims it's around 500 kilometers long. Their fighters use these tunnels to move around, also to plan surprise attack. The IDF is pumping seawater into the tunnels. The idea is to flush the Hamas out. It's a tricky strategy though. Many reports say Hamas is holding hostages inside these tunnels. What if the IDF ends up flooding those? So Netanyahu is taking a big risk here, but then again, that's been his entire war strategy. Speaking of strategies, Pakistan Army Chief Asim Munir is pursuing a new one, a reset with the United States. He's arrived in Washington, D.C. in his first trip to the U.S. after taking office. And what's on the agenda? Today he met the U.S. Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin. No cameras, no sound bites, just a statement from the Pentagon. It's a masterclass on how to withhold information. The U.S. statement mentions two things. One, Austin hosted Asim Munir. And two, they discussed regional issues and defense cooperation. ChatGPT could have done a better job. Asim Munir has more meetings lined up. He is expected to meet Secretary of State Antony Blinken, also National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. There is also talk of meetings with U.S. lawmakers. Now, General Munir has a tough job here. His mission is to hit the reset button, to take the U.S.-Pakistan relationship back to how it was. But for that, he needs common ground, something to cooperate on. But after Afghanistan, there is very little. The U.S. is more invested in its relationship with India. On the flip side, Pakistan needs a lot more from the US. For starters, they need trade. America is Pakistan's largest export market. They sell goods worth $5 billion every year. Then there is aid. In 20 years, the US has given Pakistan close to $32 billion. A lot of it is military aid, $32 billion. And finally, help at the International Monetary Fund. The US has a sizable voting share at the IMF, around 16%. So without their support, Pakistan cannot get more bailouts. Hence, Asim Munir's visit. Normally, the Prime Minister would do something like this. The Prime Minister would visit. But this is Pakistan. If serious business has to be done, it has to be the Army Chief. So that's the financial side of it. Now let's come to the security aspect. General Munir will have two issues on his agenda. The first is the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or the Pakistani Taliban, TTP. They have been on a rampage recently. The TTP and its offshoots have been mounting multiple daring attacks. This week they attacked an army base. More than 20 soldiers were killed. So General Munir will try to convince the US of the TTP threat. Maybe press for more military aid, or to force Washington to put pressure on Kabul. After all, the Afghan Taliban has links with the TTP. It's a tall ask though, because the US is slowly doing business with Kabul. In the month of August, they held their first official talks. In fact, a recent US report borderline praised the Taliban. It said the Al-Qaeda and Islamic State have weakened. How? Thanks to the Taliban's counter-terror operations. There's three words I never imagined saying together: Taliban's counter-terror operations. Either way, the question is, will Washington rock that boat? For a strategic ally, maybe, but for Pakistan, highly unlikely. Which brings us to the second issue. Pakistan is deporting 1.7 million Afghan refugees. Asim Munir recently defended that decision. He said the Afghans are causing financial losses to them. But here's the problem. Many of those refugees are awaiting American travel documents, some 25,000 of them. They helped the US military in Afghanistan, so Washington had promised to bring them over. But if they return to Afghanistan, forget that. The Taliban could hunt them down. So I guess Pakistan has some leverage. But frankly, it won't be enough. General Munir is in the US at a very tough time. There are two wars going on, both funded by the United States. And in the South China Sea, there is another one that's brewing. The president himself is facing an impeachment inquiry, and the US public is growing tired of foreign wars. So forget a reset. General Munir's biggest challenge is to get America's attention. Let's turn to the Maldives, where the new president's tenure is off to a shaky start. His name is Mohammad Muizzu. He is sparring with his political ally, former President Abdullah Yameen. Now, these two leaders are not getting along. Yameen is not happy with Muizzu. They were members of the same coalition. Yameen was in the Progressive Party of the Maldives, PPM. But a few weeks ago, he left to form a new political outfit. And this exit came as a surprise. After all, he was part of the ruling coalition. He had just won the election. The momentum was with Yameen. So why did he leave? There's a lot of buzz in Mali. Reports say Yameen's exit is because of Mohammad Muizzu, the new president. His party is called the People's National Congress, the president's party. Together, Yameen and Muizzu fought this election. And they won. Muizzu became president. But now Yameen feels betrayed. His loyalists say their party has been hijacked and that Muizzu is sidelining them. Yameen's lawyer is a man called Mohammed Jamil. He gave an interview recently and he made some big claims. He said Yameen's party leaders are blocking his involvement. They're not letting him run the party. They're ignoring his orders. Sounds like a coup. Apparently engineered by President Muizzu. That's what the lawyer says, that Muizzu has been ignoring Yameen. He hasn't taken a single call from him. In fact, let me quote from that interview. This is what Yameen's lawyer said. I want to make one thing clear to the people. Dr. Muizzu has not picked up a single phone call from President Yameen since winning the election. If true, this exposes a rift. And it's backed by multiple observers. They say Yameen is infuriated with President Muizzu. He believes that the president used his name and his platform to win the election. The platform is India Out. It was their biggest rallying point, the India Out campaign. And Yameen was the face of this campaign. He was the one who made this election about opposing India. He wanted Indian troops to leave Mali. There are about 70 of them stationed in the Maldives, 70 Indian soldiers. They're there to support the Maldivian Defense Forces. But Yameen wanted them to leave, and he gave the slogan, India Out. It caught on. But Yameen could not contest the election. He was convicted last year in a money laundering case and sentenced to jail for 11 years. When their coalition won the election, his jail term was converted into house arrest. But like I said, he could not contest the polls. Initially, he wanted to boycott them, but later Yameen ended up backing Muizzu. And in return, Muizzu made a pledge. He promised to uphold Yameen's campaign promises, including the India Out campaign. And that's what he did. He kept his promise. Right after the swearing in, he spoke to the Indian leadership. He raised the issue of the Indian military presence. Muizzu has formally sought a withdrawal. The discussions are on, but Yameen is not in the picture. He is not part of the talks with India. He doesn't hold a position in the government, and now he's not even part of the ruling coalition. It's a win-win for Muizzu, really. He's replaced Yamin. He's become the face of the India Out campaign, and despite Yamin's exit, the president enjoys the support of his party. Many senior leaders of Yamin's former party have spoken out. They say they support President Muizzu. In fact, a hashtag is doing the rounds. I stand with Muizzu. That's what it says, the hashtag. I stand with Muizzu. The Maldivian defense minister is from the same party. Here's what he said, and I'm quoting. The PPM is with President Muizzu. We are joining hands in defense of President Muizzu's government. If this wasn't bad enough, listen to this. The defense minister is a nephew of Yamin. So the statement was brutal. And the writing is on the wall. The tables have turned on Yamin. He wanted India out of the Maldives. India is still there. Yamin is the one who's been pushed out. Our next story is from Germany. The country is at a crossroads. Germany's intelligence agency says it is facing a threat to democracy. From whom? A far-right party called Alternative for Germany. It is the country's second most popular party. AfD was not popular when it began, but it rode the anti-immigration sentiment to victory. And this trend is not unique to Germany. The right is rising across Europe. But you get why Germany is worried. They have distressing history. But is banning a party the solution? Our next report explores.
A troubled past. It's something many of us deal with. But what happens if the troubled past comes back to haunt you? What if that troubled past tries to derail all your progress? It's a question that Germany is dealing with. Since World War II, the country has had one goal: to rebuild its image. But over 70 years later, Germany is at a crossroad. The rise of the far right and a party called Alternative for Germany. Last week, Germany's domestic intelligence agency raised an alarm. It took the dramatic step of classifying the party's Saxony state branch as a threat to democracy. This is usually a first step. The next would be to ban it by calling it unconstitutional. Has Germany done this before? Yes, but those were fringe neo-Nazi parties. This is the country's second most popular party. In eastern Germany, AfD now leads in polls at around 28%. Nationally, it's at 21%, polling higher than most parties in the governing coalition. AfD was founded nearly a decade ago. It was by a bunch of Eurosceptics. They were concerned about German-backed EU bailouts. But it was the 2015 migrant crisis that gave them a boost. Then Chancellor Angela Merkel welcomed immigrants, almost 1 million of them. People were disgruntled. There was a growing skepticism and rising anti-immigration sentiment. The AfD seized that. In the elections that came in 2017, they polled third. Their campaign promise: an end to asylum. Which brings us to where they are winning. Even years after the Berlin Wall fell, Eastern Germany remains poorer and less developed than the West, which is why AfD's initial rise was ignored by the German establishment. They considered its rise in the East as just mere discontent among the people. Today, it's the strongest party by far in East Germany. And while the government may want to ban it now, they may not do it. The Federal Constitutional Court has faced situations like this before, but they've never done it. So this time it's unlikely too. But that doesn't answer the question. Why is the AfD so popular? This is a country that has had a far-right history, one that they are extremely wary of. So why is the AfD polling so high? The answer lies with the people. The AfD's rise did not happen in a vacuum, and a poll proves just that. Right-wing hostility towards democracy is growing in Germany. 1 in 12 Germans have a right-wing worldview. 5 to 7% of them support a dictatorship. Imagine that. They want a dictator in the same country as Hitler. That should ring alarm bells. But at the end of the day, it's also a failure of the establishment. failed policies and poor leadership has gotten Germany here. A right-wing party in the Bundestag for the first time since World War II. Germany can threaten to ban it, but what will it do about its support? How will a ban solve that? In fact, it could have the opposite effect. It could further convince them that the far right is a challenge to the establishment. It's a slippery slope. With a ban, AfD could gain more backers. Instead, Germany, the land from where Hitler began his rule, must convince its people that democracy is the only way to go.
To Japan now, which is also embroiled in a political scandal, but it's not some ideological war. It's an old-fashioned corruption scandal, and it has rocked Japan's ruling party. The Japanese public is furious. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida is scrambling. His approval ratings have tanked. They're about 23%, the approval rating. So yesterday, he made this announcement.
We will lead the Liberal Democratic Party as a ball of fire to restore the public's trust.
He said he would lead his party, the LDP, as, and I'm quoting, a ball of fire. Today, that fireball scorched the party's top leadership. 4 of his cabinet ministers have been sacked. This includes Kishida's right-hand man, the chief cabinet secretary, Hirokazu Matsuno. He was among the accused in the scandal. He has been forced to step down along with 3 others. So what exactly is their crime? It's been called a fundraising scandal. You see, funds are raised for political campaigns, and these funds were misappropriated. More than 100 members of Japan's ruling party are being investigated for this. The former chief cabinet secretary is one of them. He has resigned. And he was joined by these 3 top ministers. 5 cabinet vice secretaries stepped down as well. Now, while all of this sounds pretty standard, you must remember this is Japan. And what might surprise you is the amount of money involved. It's a huge scandal. How much money did it involve? Around 500 million yen. That's the total amount being investigated. 500 million yen. That's close to $3.5 million US dollars. That's million with M, 3.5 million. For our Indian audience, that's a little less than 30 crore rupees. So 30 crore rupees misappropriated by 100 people over the course of 5 years. In the world of political corruption, it's loose change. But the Japanese take it very seriously. So here's how it happened. Politicians raise funds for their parties. They're expected to bring a minimum amount. Anything above that minimum is theirs to keep. They can pocket the difference. They can just keep it. It's legal on one condition. They must report what they keep. The people should know. But in this case, they did not disclose the amount. There are criminal allegations that they siphoned off this money to a slush fund or use it for bribery. Reports say the cabinet secretary failed to disclose about $70,000. A minister hid about $7,000. And I repeat, this was over a period of 5 years, $7,000. And because of this, they have stepped down. It is commendable that Japan takes corruption so seriously. No matter how small the amount is, no matter how high the office is, no one is immune, not even someone who is second in line for the prime ministership. For Kishida, the scandal could prove to be disastrous. It's the 3rd major crisis to rock his party in the last 1 year. The prime minister, as I said, is scrambling to mitigate the damage. His new cabinet was sworn in earlier today. The foreign secretary has been elevated to cabinet secretary. The entire party is working towards building back trust.
As the government is under intense scrutiny, I would like to do whatever I can within the responsibilities given to me to restore trust.
Now, while part of Kishida's response is political, we should take a step back to appreciate Japan here. The Japanese people placed immense pressure on the ruling party. They forced the country's 2nd most powerful politician to resign over 70,000 USD. A cabinet minister had to walk over $7,000 that were unaccounted for. This no-nonsense attitude towards corruption is truly commendable. It shows that no one needs to tolerate even the tiniest amount of graft. It's a lesson that people all over the world should take to heart.
अगर हम गेट नहीं खोलेंगे तो ये बोलेंगे कि मीडिया वाले को भी ये जवाब नहीं दे रहे, तो हम इस मामले में चोर साबित नहीं होना चाहते।
घर में कैसा माहौल है? काफी
घर में ठीक है, नहीं कोई तनाव वाली बात नहीं है, ऐसी तो कोई बात नहीं है तनाव। कोई गलत काम किया है तो उसकी सज़ा उसको ज़रूर मिलेगी, लेकिन देखते हैं उससे मिलने देंगे या नहीं देंगे, वो तो बाकी बात है, तो उसको मिलने के पता ही चलेगा कि बाद में कि उसने क्यों कदम उठाया है, किस लिए उठाया है। मैं तो सिर्फ एक ही बात कहना चाहता हूँ कि उसको भी अपना जो बात है, जो उसके विचार हैं, उनको रखने की ज़रूरत है, उनको भी उनका विचार रखने देना चाहिए।
नहीं तो ये तरीका जो चुना गया, तैयार किया गया पार्लियामेंट में घुसने का, काफ़ी ज़्यादा ड्रास्टिक या काफ़ी बड़ा कदम नहीं था?
हाँ, ये बड़ा कदम तो था, जिसको सभी इसकी सराहनीय तो कोई नहीं कर रहा है। प्रोटेस्ट करना था, बाद में कर लेते। इसका आपको पता है कि 13 दिसंबर को पहले भी हुआ था ये घटना, तो उसको जोड़ने के लिए पूरी मीडिया ये कर रही है कि इसको इससे जोड़ें, लेकिन जब उसका लिंक ही नहीं है उसके साथ, कोई पन्नू के साथ जोड़ रहा है। मैं तो नाम ही पहली बार सुना, ये पन्नू है कौन? कल देखा है मीडिया में कि ये पन्नू है। ये बोल रहे हैं कि इसका बैंक अकाउंट चेक करो। अकाउंट चेक कर लो, आप सभी परिवार के चेक कर लो, उसका के लिए क्यों करो? सभी परिवार का चेक करो, अकाउंट देख लो हमारा क्या इनकम है, क्या सोर्सेज हैं हमारे इनकम के, तभी पता चलेगा ना।
तो अभी दिल्ली निकल रहे हैं, कितने लोग जाएंगे दिल्ली? इसका
फिलहाल यहाँ से तो मैं अकेला हूँ, उचाना जाऊँगा, पहले किसानों से मिलूँगा, उनको पूछूँगा कि कौन कौन मेरे साथ जाएगा या नहीं जाएगा। वो डिपेंड करता है उन पर, जाएंगे नहीं जाएंगे, लेकिन मेरे को तो जाना पड़ेगा। मेरी सिस्टर है, मैं उसकी सपोर्ट में खड़ा हूँ और खड़ा रहूँगा, हमेशा खड़ा रहूँगा, चाहे कुछ भी हो जाए।
So as you heard there, that the family also had no idea that something like this was in the plans, and also the family members will now be leaving from here, their village, and they will be going to the national capital and will try to meet their sister Neelam. Now there are serious charges that have been pressed against her by the Delhi police, including the likes of UAPA. Now, as you know, that UAPA is one of the most strictest of the acts that have been made by the national government, and getting out or getting any sort of relief when UAPA is slapped against anyone is going to be a very, very big task. Now, 4 people have been slapped with the UAPA, whereas Vicky alias Vishal has been slapped with 120B, that is being involved in creating this entire criminal conspiracy, or being involved in the planning of this entire crime, because
Now let's shift focus towards Africa. As the US seems to have done, Washington is trying to woo the continent with trade and investments. It has been trying to do so for a while now. Last December, the US had promised to invest $55 billion in Africa. This would be over the course of 3 years. We've just hit the 1-year milestone, and the results look promising. Washington has hailed 2023 as a record year for US-Africa trade. They've signed almost 550 new trade deals worth over $14 billion. This means Washington is walking the talk for a change. But what's in it for them? This is not a humanitarian project. This is an investment, both economic and strategic. Our next report explains.
There were some festivities and pats on the back in Washington, D.C. yesterday. A U.S. government department called Prosper Africa was celebrating its achievements. This is a 2-year-old initiative. As the name suggests, it focuses on the African continent. Its mission is simple: pump money and investments into the continent. And yesterday, the American government team showed off their hard work. They released a book, a deal book. It details everything that has taken place since last December, since Washington held a US-Africa Leaders Forum to kickstart business with the continent. Leaders from 49 African nations had gone to the US last year, and as a result, the US government was given its mandate. Here are the results. 547 deals have been closed. That's about 60% more deals closed than in the previous year. They're worth $14.2 billion. The US is calling 2023 a record year for trade with Africa. So does this mean that the US is on the way to becoming Africa's main trading partner? No, it's not even close. Here's a trade report by the African Export-Import Bank. It's from earlier this year. It looks at African trade with other regions of the world. As you can see, African trade with North America was at about 5% in both exports and imports. This is compared to over 30% for Africa-Asia trade. Africa's main trading partner is China. Beijing has spent billions over the years to corner trade in the African continent. And it's not just trade, you also have massive investments pouring in. And of course, loans and debt. China has been evasive while declaring the amount of loans it has given to the continent. But there are trackers that try and calculate that amount. As you can see, it has been substantial over the last few years. And some African nations have paid the price of debt dealings with China. Some countries like Zambia and Ghana have even defaulted on their external loans. The situation is dire, but it also opens up an opportunity for players like the US. Washington can try and make inroads into Africa, try and turn the continent away from its risky ties with Beijing, which is why it makes sense for the US to push for trade with Africa at present. Will this gambit pay off? Will Washington actually manage to supplant Beijing as Africa's trade partner of choice? It's unlikely, at least anytime soon. The gulf between the two powers is far too great in Africa at the moment. But the US will try and make the continent a battlefield nonetheless. What about the African nations themselves? Well, the continent may actually come out of this as the biggest beneficiary. If it can play the US and China against each other, Africa can walk off with great trade deals and investments. Staying neutral and getting courted by both may be the best outcome for the continent. But we'll have to wait and see if Africa actually manages to play its cards right.
Australia's worst serial killer, the most hated woman, baby killer for 20 years, Kathleen Folbigg, has been called many names. In 2003, she was convicted for killing her children, 4 of them. She spent 2 decades in jail and now her conviction has been quashed by an appeals court. Because of genetic evidence, it shows that her children may have died of natural causes. So the courts believe she is innocent. Like she said, she was 20 years ago. Her name has been cleared, she's free to go home, but at what cost? Will Australia have to pay for this miscarriage of justice? Our next report tells you.
In 1999, Australia was rocked by a shocking discovery, the death of 4 very small children. And at the centre of the saga, there was one woman, Kathleen Folbigg. She found herself accused of a crime that would change her life forever. The evidence was damning. But 20 years later, it looks like appearances and details can be deceiving. Between 1989 to 1999, Kathleen lost 4 of her children. They all died one after the other. Her first child, Caleb, was only 19 days old when he died. That was in 1989. Her second child, Patrick, died in 1991. He was just 10 months old. Her third child, Sarah, died in 1993. She was 10 months old. And her last child, Laura, died in 1999. She was barely 19 months old. So, 4 very young children, 4 sudden deaths, and the mother connecting them all. All fingers pointed to Kathleen, but her original guilty verdict wasn't based on medical evidence or even circumstantial evidence. It was based on diary entries. Diary entries that she made over the years. Kathleen wrote about how difficult life with children was, how she once left her daughter to cry for 5 minutes. For many mothers, it was normal stuff, guilt that they felt every day. But for the court, it was an admission of crime.
The case against me was always about my diaries and Meadows Law. They cherry-picked words and phrases from my journals. Those books contained my private feelings, which I wrote to myself. No one expects those type of things to be read by strangers, let alone opinionated on. They took my words out of context and turned them against me. They accused me of something I never wrote about, never did, and never could do. I hope that no one else will ever have to suffer what I've suffered.
Folbigg continued to maintain her innocence, but it wasn't until 2018 that people started taking her seriously. That's because new evidence emerged. Folbigg's 2 daughters carried a rare genetic variant, one that could have led to their deaths. Her sons too had a different genetic mutation. It's been linked to sudden onset epilepsy in mice. That led scientists to believe that they may have died of natural causes. So people petitioned for Kathleen. It reached the courts. They said there was reasonable doubt. In June this year, she was pardoned by the New South Wales governor. She was finally out of prison after 20 years. Many believe this is the biggest miscarriage of justice in Australia's legal history. But it isn't the only case in the world. Mothers across the world have been wrongly accused of killing their children. It had happened before in Australia in 1982 to a woman named Lindy Chamberlain. She was convicted of the murder of her daughter. 6 years later, she was freed and the government had to pay her $872,000. In 2003, there was Britain's Sally Clark. She was convicted of murdering her sons. She was in prison for 3 years. Later, they found that the children died naturally. Clark was released. She was later found dead at home as she never recovered from the trauma. Clearly, the aftermath of wrongful convictions extends far beyond the prison gates. How does one rebuild a life shattered by false accusations?
I love my children, and I always will. I know I am one of the lucky ones. I have a chance with support to rebuild my life. But there are many other people who aren't so lucky. In our lucky country, Australia, this should not be the case. We need to be humble and open to improving the system to ensure truth is revealed, because truth and the correct legal outcomes matter. Thank you.
Kathleen's fight for justice may be over, but for Australia, this is a moment of reflection. This could be a turning point for its legal system, a mistake that they could pay for dearly. Kathleen hasn't talked compensation yet, but it could be the biggest payout in the country's history. Justice may have been served, but it came 20 years too late for Kathleen Folbigg.
The world belongs to early risers, and we're just living in it. We have heard it all before. The early bird gets the worm. Early to bed and early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy and wise. World leaders swear by these quotes, like Mahatma Gandhi and Winston Churchill. Despite all their differences, they were both early risers. So are many of the world's most successful people. Apple CEO Tim Cook gets up at 3:45 a.m. Former PepsiCo CEO Indra Nooyi wakes up as early as 4 a.m. Indian billionaire Mukesh Ambani wakes up at 5:30 a.m. Everyone wants to be a virtuous early bird. Some do it better than others. Colombia is the earliest riser in the world at 6:31 a.m., followed by Indonesia and Japan. By comparison, India wakes up at 7:36 a.m., America's 7:20 a.m., Russia's 8:06 a.m. So differences exist. But it is demanded of everyone that they wake up early, which is easier said than done. If you are just not a morning person, science says you may never be. And this is not because you smash your alarm clock when it rings or because you have deep-seated hatred for the sun. It is because of your genes. And you can blame the Neanderthals for this. They were a species of archaic humans. They're extinct now. They were alive until about 40,000 years ago. But they intrigue science even today. Modern humans, or our ancestors, procreated with them. They passed down fragments of their DNA. Some of it is still found in living humans. It gives us survival advantage, makes us more immune to disease, influences our appetite, and even affects how or when we sleep. Now, a new study is out. It says Neanderthals were morning people. They lived in Eurasia on higher altitudes, where days became shorter in the winter. So they woke up early to collect food as soon as the day began. Over hundreds of thousands of years, their body clocks adapted to this geography, and their descendants with modern humans inherited these body clock genes. So many people who are early risers today probably have these genes. From an evolutionary perspective, being an early riser makes sense. You can gather more food. You can also stand guard against wild beasts that emerge in the wee hours. But in today's day and age, how important is it to be a lark? Should you force yourself to wake up early? I will let you decide that. Just for a minute, let's ignore the pedestal that hails morning people. I'm going to look at both the feathered categories, the early birds, who are more active in the morning, and the night owls, those who thrive in the dark. It is estimated that 50% of the world does not fit in either of these categories. As for the remaining half, roughly 25% of people are early risers, another 25% are night owls. Does this mean that night owls are always late to work, or that early risers don't party till dawn? According to science, the difference lies in their inherent qualities. Morning people are said to be more analytical and cooperative, more persistent. They set higher goals for themselves, plan for the future more, and have a better sense of well-being. This is what science says. On the other hand, night owls are said to be more imaginative and individualistic, more creative, more open to new experiences or taking chances. Now, whichever side you pick, you will find redeeming qualities. Yet, our society tends to reward only 25% of the world's population. It is time to rethink that. Appending your natural body clock is like trying to be someone else. It is a waste of who you are. So redefine what success means to you and put this debate of waking up to bed. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Elon Musk's Tesla has unveiled Optimus Gen 2. It's Tesla's new humanoid robot that can squat, dance and boil eggs. In the UK, the Royal Mint released dinosaur coins, with each 50p coin showing a different species.
Between all of them actually happened at the residence of Vicky alias Vishal in Gurugram, and also the one person who is still absconding is Lalit Jha. Now Lalit Jha is being said to be the head of this entire meeting that happened. He was the person who actually planned this entire thing, and he was the person who initially posted the first video of this entire incident on his social media account as well. Now Lalit Jha is still absconding from the grasp of the Delhi police. It remains to be seen when will Lalit Jha get in control of the Delhi police, because yes, it is being said that he was the person who had actually plotted this entire plan. He was the person who brought all of these people in touch. These people got in touch, what sources have confirmed to CNN News 18 at this point in time. They got in touch through social media, specifically through Facebook. They got in touch, and the plan was actually being hatched to carry out this protest since the month of January itself. Now Manoranjan, remember the person on whose name the visitor pass was issued, he was the person who actually conducted a recce in the winter session, in the monsoon session, right after the parliament shifted into the new building. And when that recce happened, he realized that as visitors enter the parliament building or inside the Lok Sabha, the booths are not checked, and hence the decision was taken by him that they could hide these canisters in the booths. But thankfully,
there is the politics of it, and then there is also the technical aspects of it. How did the breach happen? Could more have been done? What can be done to stop this from happening again? And under what